Well, good afternoon, everybody, and happy St. Patrick's Day. So as I'm recording this for the parish YouTube channel, Catholic Parishes, Northwest Mississippi, Facebook as well. Both the Facebook and the YouTube at this time last year was unheard of. A lot of things at this time last year were unheard of. This talk today is titled Wrestling with Faith. And this is the title of the talk I was scheduled to give on St. Patrick's Day 1 year ago. We were going to have it in the evening. That morning we got the notification from the diocese that everything was shut down. Masses, sacraments, talks, everything. Very, very painful to say the least. And as a sentimental purpose, I have elected to do this talk on this day precisely 1 year later, when many things have changed. Some have been difficult to adapt to, while others have been for the good. But let us just recall some moments a year ago today on St. Patrick's Day that reminds us of those very scary beginning days of this whole thing of the church being shut down, followed subsequently by the state of Mississippi a couple of weeks later, along with every state in the Union and most nations throughout the world. Father T and I knew that the penance service here inside the church had to be canceled, but nothing said that we could not do a drive-through confession, so we scrambled to notify people, and somebody was very grateful for it, and I think somebody even tried to say something to the effect of, "You're making lemonade where there's no lemons." And that is what it literally felt like. And so, two signs we had in the drive-through confession that I elected to put at my station, and that is social. This is from a year ago, and if you recall, last year was a long time ago, but renewed by grace, these cards we were giving out. Do you remember this at all? It feels like it's been so long ago because of all the things that happened. But remember this word that you really knew had a definition of by this time last year? So just to put social distance hugs, $2, no refund. So we got that. That was in the drive-through confession. But on the other side of the priest's chair for the confession, it said also, with the sign renewed by grace, confession free of charge. And while most things could not take place, we are still in a position where we can at least talk to people outdoors. And for that, we are grateful for it. It's something that none of us will ever forget. Nor will we ever forget some of the other challenges that we had last year, which were just unbelievable. Like things we take for granted that may have been missing from the shelf last year. What is this? Did you take it for granted a year ago today that you were going to have it?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. That went missing. What's this?
Gold.
Somebody said gold, and some people treated this as a gold mine because it was in short supply really fast. Something that you would normally find too much of on inventory. And then, going back over here, what's in this box? Gloves. Was that easy to come by last year? Absolutely not. I can give these away now. It's not a problem. What about this? Oh, this was like not only hoarded, but this was going on the market for very high prices, along with like hand sanitizer. Remember that case in Tennessee? I think there was somebody that had gotten something like 17,000 bottles and put on the market for a very ridiculously high price. And these were going for very high prices too. What you could sometimes find at Walmart before the pandemic, a case of 4 for $10. You forget about that. It was in very high demand. And then, remember masks a year ago today? Hospitals were short on masks, remember? People were looking for masks. This was a big problem, a big concern. And here, we can just spray this like it's cool now. But what do we have a year ago? Was this a problem?
It's only been on the shelf themselves a short time.
And if it might be this small and twice as much, it's something that's coming back that's been very painful for many to have. But last but not least, take a guess at what's coming out next. I was actually worried last year so much about this that I said if we have anybody coming into the building at all, we better make sure, just in case, to make sure we have it all locked up because you don't know what's going to happen next. And there was a lot of uncertainty, but yeah, toilet paper, gloves, Lysol spray. Is it Lysol spray? Some disinfectant? Well, it's equivalent of Lysol and Clorox wipes, paper towels, bleach. These are all things that up until just about a little over a year ago, easily taken for granted, easily affordable, no problems. But then when our lives were interrupted by the least likely things to interrupt our lives, like not only a shortage of cleaning supplies, but you would find yourselves at this time of last year going to a grocery store where there is no meat, or no bread, or no eggs. I get grouchy if I can't cook eggs for breakfast. It ain't pretty looking at me. But you know what? Those are the things that were dealt with. And we were reminded at that time that even in our country, you could be in short supply, and we're reminded not to take things for granted. But certainly that was a good a test of our faith. And that is why I had actually made that title of our topic a year ago today that I was going to give, because already we knew we were in trouble. We didn't know how deep it was going to go, so deep that we actually had to shut down the churches. But to kind of address and place a little comfort in the people was the initial plan a year ago. Now it's about still wrestling with our faith, but how we've been able to move forward, what has helped us to get through this past year. So the same topic with a few adjustments for the good of all. And so as we do this, and as it happened on St. Patrick's Day, was one St. Patrick's Day we will never forget. But on this St. Patrick's Day, let us talk about St. Patrick really briefly, and also recap the classes I gave earlier this year, the former prophets. Then I talk about, and I talk today, wrestling with faith prophets. But then we notice here, prophets spelled differently. So what happened at the beginning of this pandemic, especially with items that we take for granted? If somebody had a good supply of their own, try to sell it for a high profit, where greed and profit were placed over people. St. Patrick knew all too well that he was considered by somebody else the prophet. And you see the greater sign, remember your math in school, is greater than people. Because St. Patrick was treated as an object early on as a teenager, sold into slavery, which we would more popularly consider today as a victim of human trafficking. Around the age of 14, it is said, he came from present-day England and was supposedly captured by Irish pirates having a little raiding party. And he was sold into slavery and literally trafficked into Ireland, tending the sheep for about 5 years, probably in plain sight. Some may have known he was a slave, others may not have known that. We don't know all those details, but we do know that he was held against his free will. And the fact that he was able to do a daring escape and get out of there after 5 years of imprisonment, having his teenage years robbed of him because he was a slave, a victim of human trafficking. It's nothing new under the sun. It's been around as long as people have had what is called the opportunity, because there are always opportunists among us. The pirates had an opportunity to take him. Somebody else had an opportunity to buy him and use him for cheap to free labor, either little to no income. And so he was a victim of that kind of oppression. and certainly he would have been put to the test. But even for him, as we reflect on some of the good things that have come out of this pandemic, there was something good that came out of this experience for him. Can you believe that? Being a victim for 5 years. He came home, was reunited with his family, was later called to become a priest, a Catholic priest. And he one day thought about, Ireland. It was known as pagan Ireland back there. Came from Catholic, Roman British Isle, which was mostly at that time Catholic. And he wanted to go there and build churches and try to convert people. And he spent 40 years there, living also in poverty, many hardships, no doubt, but building churches and converting an island into Catholicism, the same place where he had left there with some very difficult and painful memories. But for whatever reasons, he had found his way to bring the gospel back to a pagan island and give them what they did not have access before. As they had access to paganism, as they had access to enslaving others, he wanted to give them access to the gospel of mercy, the gospel of God, of Jesus Christ. So he did this. Would he have done that had he not been in slavery? We don't know. But would he have known about Ireland if he had not been taken over there? We don't really know, because we don't know what his interest would have been. We don't know how long it would have been before that island was converted to Catholicism, before they were able to introduce people to something other than paganism and bring good to people. Because St. Patrick had a gift of, I would say, based on what he did, of seeing good in others. Maybe he even saw good in those pirates who were having a big party at his expense and at many others' expense. Maybe he saw good in all the others that were making people victims of human trafficking. And he did find good in them, enough so to be motivated to come back and convert. Jesus Christ is the model of finding good in others. Look at one example. Remember Zacchaeus in Scripture? Who is Zacchaeus? Tax collector. What was the problem with tax collectors in the ancient Mediterranean culture and the Roman Empire? They took advantage of people. Why did they take advantage of people? For profit. Profit over people. That is, you have answered correctly. And there's one other big thing here that goes into the category of opportunist. You know what that is? No oversight. All the emperor wants is his money. I don't care how you do it, tax collector. Just make sure you meet the quota. So let's say that Stephanie owes $100 to the emperor. As far as the tax collector is concerned, once there's no oversight and it then doesn't have to show Stephanie proof that's how much Stephanie owes, the tax collector is going to say, give me $300 and that will satisfy the emperor. $100 to the emperor, $200 to the tax collector. Imagine him doing that to Milton, Mayon, Nancy, Bill. And he might change his mind and say, well, if they're giving me that much money, I'm going to raise the price even more, because I'm going to take advantage of it. Oh, Peter's a fish. Simon and Andrew are fishermen. They may not be rich, but they might make more money than the person next door. I'm going to tax them good because I know they've made some profit this year. So, taking advantage. So Zacchaeus was short in stature for sure. The story in Scripture is he climbed the sycamore tree to see Jesus. He was intimidated and despised of by the population because of his occupation. But nevertheless, He recognized that there was something missing in his life. He didn't just climb the sycamore tree to look for somebody else to tax on that day. He was looking for somebody that he recognized and heard about to be significant, that might mean to him something more than money, that might tell him and convince him that people are worth more than profit. And if he can be convinced that people are worth more than profit, then indeed he will be an instrument to helping Jesus realize the fulfillment of the prophets by placing people over profit. And so Zacchaeus, although despised of and by others, and naturally so, because that's how human nature works sometimes, met with Jesus, and Jesus did so because Jesus saw good in Zacchaeus. Jesus recognized that Zacchaeus can and will change, but only if Jesus will talk to him. So Jesus is going to give easily the time of day to Zacchaeus, just as he gave the time of day to somebody else that saw something missing in his life. Who was the central person besides Jesus in our gospel passage this past Sunday, fourth Sunday of Lent? What was his name? Nicodemus. What was his occupation? He was a Pharisee. Were the Pharisees admired by the entire population? Absolutely not. Harsh rules on people, expecting them to do things that they would not do themselves. Turned into the 10 Commandments basically into 2,000 laws. Some unrealistic. So many they didn't follow themselves. If they truly followed them, then why were there tables with money changers in the temple? Look at this. You saw this behind on the altar last Sunday, and this is how the table looked on the altar. It's turned over. It looks out of place. Jesus did that. He showed some frustration by humbling those that were doing it. And why would the money changers be inside of a temple? What's the logical reason for it? Morally, of course, incorrect. It doesn't quite go with the faith, but why would they be in there? What were they doing? Take advantage of people. Roman currency, was it accepted in the temple? They had their own currency inside the temple to get other things like people would get for sacrifices, right? So they knew they could take advantage of them because they would take advantage of them for being faithful, for offering those sacrifices, and thus they needed the right currency. So Staffing is going to give me $100. I'm going to give her back $22 to buy a $21 or something that is also overpriced. But people are being taken advantage of, and Jesus has had enough of this. And he turns the tables over. It doesn't mean he's not seeing good in the money changers. But if he says nothing, the money changers cannot recognize for themselves that they have a chance to be better for themselves. So Jesus has to say something. His approach is a little bit more aggressive than other approaches he's used. But he's doing so for the sake of trying to see some good in them, and not to take advantage of the people, and not to make this a realistic thing, profit being greater than people. So, you hear me saying all this because does not these things we hear about test our faith, cause us to wrestle with our faith? So last year, if we were been allowed to be function just a few hours longer, I would have been focused on all those things that I showed you earlier. All those items that we took for granted before then, that we have in better supply now. But nowhere near are we taking those for granted today as we did before last year, are we? Please don't. Never know when something like this could ever happen again. And we hope it never does happen again. And so the people that buy and then sell it for a much higher price, because by nature for some, it's that profit over people. And so St. Patrick, whose wonderful feast we celebrate today, was clearly a victim of this. But his being a victim would later prompt him to truly learn what it means to place people over everything else by again bringing the gospel of Jesus to the people of Ireland. And so that is precisely what his calling for the rest of his life was. And it's possible he could have done many other things after he had escaped from slavery. But he chose to go back there because he cared about the people so much, including the people that were there to victimize him and others for the sake of bringing labor. So as we heard me talk about earlier, St. Patrick indeed was a slave and was a victim of what we know today as human trafficking, which is still a problem today. Is it a problem in the United States of America? Yes, it is, very much so. And there are reasons to be concerned about this. I was just hearing on another segment on the news about many of the unaccompanied children on the border. And what that enables, of course, is somebody like this has happened on many occasions in the past, where somebody doing that, or even flying in with another country with some papers, could be promised a job in the United States, let's say working in a nice hotel, having a place to stay, even having enough money to send back to your family, let's say, for example, in the Ukraine, or Bulgaria, or El Salvador. Only to find out when they get there, they're being escorted somewhere else. And all of a sudden they're being asked to do things that they would never have been imagined doing, that they were horrified doing. And they're in a position where it's hard to get out because they might have information on their family back home. And they don't want their family to get hurt. Or those who are taking advantage of, they're vulnerable. They may have run away from home and are given a lot of all these other promises which turn out to be empty promises. And that is a challenge, and one that is certainly frustrating when we see these things and hear about these things that happen even in our own backyard. And certainly exhibits a test of our faith when so many are tempted and will give in to the temptation of doing terrible things. And Jesus was even tempted by the devil for 3 occasions in his 40 days as he withdrew with the devil into the wilderness. When we talk about temptation, and it's temptation, greed, and that leads to doing some of the things that, like lucrative profiting, like human trafficking, or the lucrative profiting of things like selling things for very high prices because it's in high demand. Jesus was tempted, and there's 3 different temptations the church teaches, and the first one is the one that Jesus was involved in, and that is called the external temptation. The external temptation involves where the outsider tries to tempt the person, told Jesus to do this, do that, do this, but Jesus does not follow through with the temptation. He has resisted and teaches us to resist the temptation, right? And so through that resistance is an external temptation. He was not about to perform miracles in front of the devil. That had to be saved for others. And the second is an internal temptation, but one that is not necessarily done at the free will of the sinner. So, for example, somebody be a victim of trafficking and asked to do things, different jobs on the side, like going into a liquor store and taking some stuff, but out of fear that something might happen to their family, out of fear that they might get hurt, out of fear that the person who's sending them in the store is at the car watching them and their every move. There's a crime that has been committed by them, but they are certainly not free to say no at that moment. They are put in a very bad position, or if not a totally unfree position, one that's very compromising to them, or one that they may just be put in fear of, and thus they find themselves doing what they're doing. But then the third and final one, also internal, and this is the deepest part of the soul right here, one that we can truly and freely do without any fear. So let's say, for example, you are a student and you want to do really well on your exam, and you elect to cheat on the test, and thus you decide to sneak a few cards in your little jacket if it's a cool enough day, or in your pocket, or write answers on your hand. I see you nodding like you've been there, done that with students before.
No, I've had students doing that before.
She says she's had students doing that before. First of all, no matter who your teacher is, they weren't born yesterday, right? So if you're going to look at your hand during your test, why do you need to look at your hand? I mean, if you have to stop and look at yourself in the mirror to see if you combed your hair this morning, it looks weird, but it doesn't look as weird as looking at your hand during the test. Because you can see your hand, you can't see your face. Unless you have a mirror. So there's something there, or you have something in your hand. Why do you need something in your hand besides your pen and paper that you have the test on? So something doesn't look right. And of course, when you cheat and do wrong on the test, you also only cheat yourself, because you ruin for yourself the opportunity for development. If you're going to be an opportunist, it shouldn't be finding a way to cheat to skate by on the exam. Because then you have to go to your parents, and the parents may have asked, did you study hard for that exam? I heard you made an A. And then you find yourself lying to your parents because the truth is that you cheated. But instead, you cheat yourself, and once you rob yourself of the opportunity to develop, you indeed are sinking into the deepest part of your soul in that temptation. Because, and when it comes to our life of faith, the one that we wrestle with, because it's our human nature to do so, we encounter a lot of frustrations, because that's what life presents us. If we were to give up or just not give faith a chance, then we can indeed find ourselves, sinking into the hole. And to add a little humor to this, let me read you a little joke from that book of jokes, Catholic jokes, to talk about one person that doesn't have illustrate any faith at all is a highly spoken atheist, and a devout Catholic next door. And so I'm going to give you this little joke here. And so, as soon as I find it, here it is. So it's from this world's greatest collection of church jokes. Last Sunday, Annie's pastor challenged his congregation to be aware of opportunities to testify for Jesus. Now, Annie was certainly known for her faith and her boldness in talking about the Lord. She was known to stand on her front porch and, for the benefit of her atheist neighbor, shout, "Praise the Lord," resulting in her godless neighbor's response, "There ain't no God." When hard times set in, Annie stood on her porch and prayed, "Praise the Lord. Please, God, send me groceries." The next morning, she found a large bag of groceries on her porch, which caused her to shout, "Praise the Lord." On cue, her neighbor jumped out from behind the bush and cried, "Hey, don't give God the credit. I bought those groceries. He didn't." So Annie laughs, jumps up and down, claps her hands, shouts, "Praise the Lord. He not only sent me groceries, but he made the devil pay for them." So, always being, non-believers among us. And there'll always be those ones that don't give themselves the opportunity, for whatever reason, to express or look into faith. But something like that of Zacchaeus, about trying to see good in something. Something about that atheist neighbor was that she saw some good in doing something and realized she was doing a good deed. And maybe didn't even realize truly in the bottom of her heart that she had some faith somewhere deep in her soul that she was struggling to just dig out. And that was certainly a good step that she expressed right there by actually not talking or doing words like there ain't no God, I don't believe, stop shouting, stop giving God credit, but she actually physically left her home, went to the grocery store, got her groceries, her Catholic neighbor, because she was in need, and ended the day by doing a very good deed. But when we get tested, we find ourselves in very odd situations like the prophet Jeremiah. It was Jeremiah who we're going to hear about this coming Sunday on our 5th Sunday of Lent. And while there was a covenant made to Noah, that was our first Sunday of Lent, a covenant made to Abraham, our second Sunday of Lent, a covenant for Moses, and our third Sunday of Lent, we see in Jeremiah this weekend that he talks about the covenants and what the new covenant would look like as he's prophesied in the future, talking about the new covenant, one that is going to be eternal. It's not going to be a broken covenant. He's talking about one that's going to be, of course, for all people. But above all, Jeremiah believes that the new covenant will be coming and written from here and not here. Jeremiah already faced opposition among people around him, and let's share with you an example of that opposition that he dealt with, even from his own people. And so, I look at chapter 38, starting with verse 4. "This man ought to be put to death," the princess said to the king. "He demoralizes the soldiers who are left in the city, and all the people by speaking such things to them. He is not interested in the welfare of our people, but in their ruin." King Zedekiah answered, "He is in your power, for the king could do nothing with them." And so they took Jeremiah and threw him into the cistern of Prince Malchiah, which was in the quarters of the guard, letting him down with ropes. There was no water in the cistern, only mud, and Jeremiah sank into the mud. Now Ebed-Melech, a Cushite, the quarter in the king's palace, heard that they had put Jeremiah into the cistern. The king happened just then to be at the gate of Benjamin, and Ebed-Melech went there from the palace and said to him, "My lord king, these men have been at fault, and in all they have done to the prophet Jeremiah, casting him into the cistern. He will die of famine on the spot, for there is no more food in the city." And the king ordered Ebed-Melech the Cushite to take 3 men along with him and draw the prophet Jeremiah out of the cistern before he should die. Now Ebed-Melech actually means the king's servant. That's the translation in English. And he's the man who intervenes, the servant, while the person that should have intervened in this situation was the king Zedekiah, who Jeremiah had a positive view of before. But instead, right in broad daylight, the king betrays Jeremiah, and it takes the servant the courage to speak up and say, "This man has been done wrong." Jeremiah found himself tested with so many people using their head over their heart. Jeremiah envisions the new covenant will come from here instead of here. And perhaps part of our wrestling with our faith is attributed by anger and resentment, things that really set us off and make us tick. And the things that make us tick and set us off, as Oscar Wilde once defined anger as the mouth moving faster than the mind. Or else also wrestling with faith can be attributed because of those attributes, anger and resentment, as the head being too much energy being concentrated up here and not enough energy being concentrated here. And so the season of Lent is most appropriate for a talk like this, because the season of Lent is a time of redemption. While we may find ourselves like Jeremiah being lowered into some deep hole and sinking in the mud because of the actions of other people, like those who try to place profit over people at very inflated and unrealistic and inhumane levels, while we hear about the suppression of the faith in many countries throughout the world and have concerns about our faith being suppressed even in our own country, we have Jesus to turn to, we have the heart to focus on, because Lent being a time of redemption is a time to ask the Lord to help us to deepen our faith, especially when our faith has been tested so much and wrestled with so much that we find ourselves tempted to sin in the deepest part of our souls, so that the Lord can, like the intervention of Ibn Melech, have the Lord work through some of our close friends to help us get out of the hole, and like Ibn Melech, intervene for us through the Lord's help. And it's the Lord's help that brought Ibn Melech to and rescued Jeremiah, because he recognized the difference between right and wrong. And it takes people that recognize the difference between right and wrong to do what is most morally and ethically correct. So St. Patrick recognized the difference between right and wrong, because he was wronged by being a victim of human trafficking. He was wronged by tending the sheep against his own free will for 5+ years. But he was right in returning to his home, his adopted home. His new found land, he came from his homeland, was sent to a new land, and when he returned to his homeland, it all practically became a wonderland, because his life was never the same again. And he found himself wondering, what can I do next? And he found what he was called to do. And while he was wronged, he brought right to a large concentration of people working exhaustively, and certainly by human nature to the annoyance of some, as not everybody would accept him. And even upon his retirement in Ireland, there was one chief in one of the groups that wanted to get rid of him, arrest him. But it turns out that did not happen. And St. Patrick was able to continue to do what the Lord called him to do. And certainly, one of our callings today, mindful of what St. Patrick was a victim of, is for us to pray for those who fall into the same victimization as St. Patrick. I have great concerns, especially when there are so many people in places like the border, or other people coming into our country who are giving a lot of promises that know nothing about what they're getting themselves into, and are taken against their free will, because the person doing knows that there's a big profit involved. They don't have any concern for the human life of the other person. Moreover, they place their power over everybody else. And it's really hurtful to others. And so much concern for those children in places like where they're not accompanied by parents or anybody, and just praying that they'll be safely taken somewhere where they're not going to become a victim of this horrifying act of trafficking that has been further enabled more recently, and unfortunately it looks like it's continuing to be so. But praying that can change, because there is good in this world, a lot of good, and we can pray for much better things to come. And that is why Jesus did what he did, I believe, is because of recognizing the suffering agony of the world. And that's why he went to the devil 3 times to be tempted, going through the external temptation, not giving in. But it had to be just very tense, hearing those same words over and over again from the devil. Do this, do that. Oh, come on, do it. Show us what you can do. This stone can be living bread. Jump off this temple. This whole land can be yours, and much more. Jesus didn't want any of that. The miracles and the healings are for the people that need, which is really all of us, because all of us have something deep in our soul that we're trying to help ourselves with, and we turn to the Lord for that help. And one wonders why that Jesus, while he could have been out there for 40 days, while he was there for 40 days, I should say, and could have been doing miracles and doing something a little bit more rewarding than being out there and standing in front of the devil for 40 days, the prince of all darkness. Why did he do what he did? Why? Well, there's a lot of explanations, but one we can offer is from a man of the early days of the church, St. Gregory the Great. He explained that if Jesus accepted and tolerated the passion he dealt with, being arrested, beaten, mocked, victim of cruel punishment, and being nailed onto that cross, the worst form of death possible in the Roman Empire, instrument of torture, if he was willing to put up with that, then to no surprise would he be willing to put up with this. To be able to prepare himself for the cross, to prepare himself for the prophecies like Jeremiah would to fulfill those prophecies, and to indeed bring the new covenant to the people, which would be one that would be eternal and one that would come from where again? According to Jeremiah, the heart over the head. May this season of Lent inspire us to begin every day our mornings from the heart over the head. Start the mornings off without our worries. Start our morning off on what can be positive, what can come from the heart, so that we can help be bettering ourselves. And that bettering of ourselves can certainly reflect the way we would encounter others, because they would see that as well. And that act of Jesus, of being without sin and doing nothing but good things, was recognized by Zacchaeus. That's why he climbed the sycamore tree, even after ripping people off. Or like Nicodemus the Pharisee, walking into the dark discreetly to see Jesus, recognizing his redemption and his covenant to such great lengths that he provided spices for Jesus' burial when the other apostles abandoned him when they needed him the most. Because it was the head for them at that time over the heart. For Nicodemus, Zacchaeus, their heart had overpowered their head. And that brought them change. And they are a living testimony that people can change. And that's what the season of Lent calls us to do. So as we continue our celebration of this St. Patrick's Day, you may be watching this video in the days to come. But remember this whole purpose to pray, continue to pray for all of those in our world who do suffer, especially those who are held against their free will, the victim of some of the most lucrative profits in the world of human trafficking, something that St. Patrick was a victim of. The reason why, we have the answer right here: temptation, which Jesus helps us to resist. And may we close this talk out with one final joke from the best church jokes. And I haven't decided which one it is going to be. I'm just going to take one out and see if it's going to fly. So it says, here's one. Critics. When the family returned from Sunday morning service, the father criticized the sermon, the organist, the cantor, and just about everything else. But the subject was quickly dropped when Junior piped up. But it was pretty good for a quarter, don't you think, Dad? So, remember, people over profit. Thank you all.